Tomorrow's tax day, the day your tax forms to Uncle Sam must get postmarked. Lost in much of the horse race coverage of the campaigns is what the candidates' tax plans really mean for individual Americans and the country as a whole. Scott Thuman now with two experts who dissect the candidates' plans.
There will be a major tax reduction.
We will pass a simple flat tax and abolish the IRS.
I do believe that the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations are going to have to start paying their fair share of taxes.
This is a remarkable election cycle, and what makes it so interesting is the gap between the presidential campaign plans is enormous.
Howard Gleckman is a senior analyst at the Tax Policy Center, a nonpartisan Washington think tank. A professional number cruncher, his economic reports aren't usually page-turning thrillers.
We can say
but this year is different.
Donald Trump and Ted Cruz have proposed huge tax cuts on a scale we have never seen before. Bernie Sanders is proposing a tax increase on a scale that we have not seen since World War II.
On the Republican side, Gleckman says the size of the Cruz and Trump tax cuts make the controversial Bush tax cuts of 2001 look like mere tweaks.
Candidates for public office make tremendous promises and hope that the public doesn't pay enough attention to understand that there are costs to these promises.
On the Democratic side, he says, well, hang on to your wallet.
So Bernie Sanders has absolutely the opposite idea from Cruz and Trump. Well, Cruz and Trump are cutting taxes, and mostly cutting taxes for high-income people. Bernie Sanders has gone way over the other side. What he's doing is he's raising taxes by everybody. He's proposing to raise taxes by $15 trillion over 10 years. So we could try this one.
To illustrate the jaw-dropping gulf between the candidates, Gleckman's group teamed up with Vox News to create a calculator that lets people see for themselves the impact of the plans on their bottom line.
So let's take a family with $60,000 in annual income. Let's make them a married couple, and let's say they have no kids.
A middle-income household earning $60,000 would seemingly reap a bonanza under Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. $4,380 for Cruz and $5,390 with Trump.
Well, it sounds great, and overall, Trump is proposing to cut taxes by almost $10 trillion over 10 years.
But Gleckman says the costs of that $10 trillion tax cut are staggering.
Those tax cuts are so enormous that he would essentially have to eliminate huge numbers of federal programs. He'd have to eliminate, for example, most of the Defense Department. He'd have to eliminate programs like the National Institutes of Health or Homeland Security or the national parks. So it's hard to imagine that he can come up with enough money to pay for tax cuts of this magnitude.
Under Bernie Sanders, this household would have to fork over an additional $6,830.
They would get free health care, they would get free college tuition, they would get more generous family leave if they were sick or had a baby or taking care of an aging parent. So they would get all these benefits, but they would have to pay higher taxes for them.
Right now, everybody's running away from the issue, and this campaign really is a fiscally reckless one so far.
Maya McGinnis is the director of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. The issue for McGinnis is how these wildly different tax approaches would affect the ballooning national debt.
So I cannot believe that in a time of record debt levels, we are sitting here and talking about cutting taxes by $10 trillion. This is not a small tax cut. This is a tax cut that would take away so much of the revenue from the federal government. And I don't care whether you think the government should be bigger or smaller. Cutting taxes just means we're not going to pay the bills.
But McGinnis doesn't spare Bernie Sanders either, because she says his massive tax hikes still won't pay for all the government spending he envisions.
His numbers fall short. So he would add anywhere from $2 trillion to $15 trillion to the debt, depending on how the cost of his health care plan played out.
Both experts say the voters need to be skeptical of these plans.
Beware of people who are peddling kind of false promises and things that sound too good to be true, because when it comes from fiscal policy, budget policy, things that sound too good to be true always are, and we need politicians who are willing to level with the voters.
You know, it's an old cliche, but it's really true. There is no free lunch.
Well, the candidates have counterpoints to some of those opinions, which you can hear them talk about all the time. Didn't say much about Clinton and Kasich.
Yeah, when it comes to John Kasich, he is the only candidate that our experts say they couldn't analyze. They've been requesting specifics from his camp to kind of lay out his tax plan in more detail. They say they haven't heard back.
And what about Hillary Clinton?
Well, Hillary Clinton, they say, isn't proposing anything that would be considered a drastic overhaul. She is a proponent of what's called the Buffett rule that would raise taxes on people making over $1 million. But, for example, they say that's one of the only ones that stand out. Otherwise, they say a lot of the status quo.
Okay. Scott Thuman, thank you. Ahead on Full Measure, Congress wants to help loosen the government's grip on public records, but guess who's been standing in the way? We'll hear from a member of Congress pushing for reform next.